there's a study showing that if you worry about getting Alzheimer's, your chance of getting Alzheimer's increases by up to 60%.
60%.
And more. So it's the worry that's the issue. So in other words, it's the messy mind. That
all 8 billion of us are doing metabolism at all times. This show is about learning what metabolism is, how it affects you in every way possible, from mood and mental state to performance and energy. We are all about fine-tuning the human experience for you to achieve the best self you can be. And if you are someone who loves science, curious to know how your body works and how to optimize it, then you are in the right place. This is the H.V.M.N. podcast. In this episode, we have Dr. Caroline Leaf, who is a communication pathologist, audiologist, and clinical and cognitive neuroscientist specializing in psychoneurobiology and metacognitive neuropsychology. Her passion is to help people see the power of the mind to change the brain, control chaotic thinking, and find mental peace. Since the early 1980s, Dr. Leaf has researched the mind-brain connection, the nature of mental health, and the formation of memory. As a highly sought-after expert on mental health, she is the host of the top-rated podcast, Cleaning Up the Mental Mess, and Dr. Leaf is also the author of several best-selling books, including Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, Switch on Your Brain, Think and Eat Yourself Smart, The Perfect You, Think, Learn, Succeed, and many more. In this episode, we talked about the brain-mind-body connection, what goes on psychologically that affect us biologically, and vice versa, as well as tips to guide your children to manage their mental health better and build resilience. Stay tuned and enjoy this episode. Hello, Dr. Caroline Leaf. Thank you very much for coming on to Health via Modern Nutrition podcast. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to meet you. We were having a great chat before we started, so we're really looking forward to this.
I know we were already nerding out on brain health, on ketones, on nutrition, on metabolic disorder. I am really, really excited. Just going in with this energy that we are going into this conversation. Let's introduce yourself first to our audience and what you do.
Absolutely. My field of research is psychoneurobiology, so that's the whole mind-brain-body connection. I've been in the field for 38 years. I practiced clinically for 25, so I've got the clinical experience. And I started off in the field of communication pathology. I did BScs and masters, MScs and PhDs in that area in neuroscience, and very quickly got into specializing in traumatic brain injury. Was one of my first areas of research, and then that expanded into dementias, autism, and then trauma, mental health. And I've spent years continuing that. I still do the research in the area, and our objective now, I don't practice anymore, but our objective as an organization is to help people to have accessible and affordable access to mental health and to understand really what it is, because it's been such a badly handled mental health has been so badly handled, and as we know, it's got worse, not better, with the way it's been done. So I've seen that trajectory over the 38 years of my career. So I've been working very hard to try and help people to be empowered to be able to understand mental health, first of all, understand your mind-brain-body connection, and then manage that. So that's kind of a Cliff Notes version of what I do.
Amazing. No. So in your opinion, why do you think mental health is becoming worse and worse?
So that's a really great question, and it's a nice loaded question, as we know. So we see that mental health is increasing. We see that it's worse in children now when you do the global surveys and so on. Children used to always be better than adults, now it's swapped around. And so we have to look at the crisis and when it started and what's going on. And the big picture of this whole thing is that we shifted our view of how we handle human behavior around 40, 50 years ago. And it was with the advent of finding the first drug that they used for people that were really battling with, having extreme cases of mental challenges, and it calmed them down. And so started a whole industry, literally an industry of medications for mental health. And the research has been very dicey and shaky and not very well replicated. And along with that was a whole concept of subsuming the idea of us as humans going through challenges in life, which we have been since the beginning of time, subsuming the impact of life on humans into the medical model, the biomedical model, where it's been seen as a list of symptoms with a neurobiological or neurochemical cause. That has been disproved, never really was proven. But that model is very strong and very dominant. So I believe that a massive contribution to the mental health crisis is that shift, because there is enough data now supporting the fact that when we don't consider the whole person, and we don't look at everything about the person, and we don't see the stories of the people and everything about their lives, and we just look at a list of symptoms and diagnose on a very incorrect scientific foundation, we're going to get worse. And the research shows people are dying 8 to 25 years younger from preventable lifestyle diseases, which is really in your wheelhouse. And that's got a lot to do with the shift of the biomedical model. And if we don't process what we're going through, it affects our metabolism. It affects everything about how we are as a human. And so, that's kind of why I believe the crisis is there. So I call it one of a crisis of mind management that has led to a crisis in mental health. And mind management encompasses managing your mind to manage the struggles of life, but it also looks at how we're going to keep our brain health physically and our body health physically aligned. But that comes from the mind. If my mind's not right, I'm not going to care about what I eat or how I supplement and so on.
That is a great answer. And it's so true how we are treating on the surface. We're treating the symptoms. We're not looking at the root cause. And that's very true for not just mental illness, like you said, for chronic illnesses, for metabolic dysfunction and all of that. So since we're talking about the root causes, let's go back to basics and talk us through what do you think is contributing to mental illness? Because as we were talking a little bit before this, Dr. Chris Palmer's work around redefining mental health as a metabolic disorder of the brain could be one of the reasons why we are facing an increase in mental health incidents. But also on top of that, I would love to pick your brain on the brain-mind connection and tell us more about what's the difference and what are the misconceptions that people have around it.
Okay, that's an excellent question. So let's start with Dr. Chris Palmer's work. I definitely believe that the changes that happen in the brain, the inflammation, the metabolic issues, these definitely will accelerate and create a feedback loop back into the mind. But I believe that those are secondary as opposed to primary. So what is the primary cause of mental health issues in the large is how we as humans are processing what's happening to us in life. And that sounds quite simple, but it is huge. Because if the way that we process life is through our mind. Our mind is not some woo-woo thing. It's also not your brain. Your mind and your brain are not the same thing. That's what mind, brain, body research talks about, or psycho, mind, neuro, brain, biology, body, looks at the fact that there's this connectedness between three different parts, each with different functions, but needing each other in order to work as a whole. So therefore, there's a feedback loop between them. So any kind of inflammation in the brain is a sign that your body is trying to fight something that shouldn't be there. That's a threat to your survival. And if you don't get to the source and the root, it's going to increase and become a hyperinflammatory response, affect metabolism and the whole downstream effect that plays out in the brain and the body. But we also have to look at, when we look at the source, we have to look at multiple levels of the source. And one of the areas that I don't believe is addressed sufficiently is looking at the mind element of that source. Because if you're dead, your mind is not working. Your brain is disintegrating. So your mind is the life force that literally is your aliveness that is keeping your brain and body working. It makes your heart pump. It makes your brain respond, etc. And because, as I said, if you put a QEEG or something or an EKG on someone who's dead, you get no response. But you get a response with an alive person. As we're sitting here having this conversation now, we're making 800,000 to 1 million new cells every second. You couldn't do that if you're dead. So your aliveness drives all these physical functions, these cell division and making new cells and metabolism and all the systems of our body. It's driving that. And therefore our mind driving this physical force, but our mind is also how we think, feel, and choose. So it's this physical electromagnetics and quantum physics and electromagnetic light forces, gravitational fields, all of those, the biofield, all of that's not weird stuff. It's pure hardcore science that we can talk about in very scientific ways. That isn't there if a person's dead. So that energy force, whatever you want to call it, that physics part of the mind is very real. And on a psychological level, it's how we think, feel, choose. So right now we're having a conversation, and it's our mind that enables us to interpret what we're hearing and seeing, and the listeners to interpret what they're hearing and seeing. And that interpretation is a whole bunch of the physics stuff, plus it's this think, feel, choose, and all of that literally gets put into the brain, and the brain responds on a neuroplastic level, which means it's changing. It converts this energy. It's like a wave that comes in and collapses and creates a genetic response and wires in with little proteins that contain the data in vibrational format into tree-like structures in the brain. And as that's happening, and this is where the whole body link comes in, the brain then, the mind-brain-body connection then instructs every cell in the body to also store representation of this conversation. Every cell in the cytoskeleton of the cell, also inside proteins. And I'm giving very simple stuff because this is complex stuff. Point being is that every experience from birth to death, moment to moment, is embodied in the whole entire network. And that entire network is how we then show up. So we're showing up in this conversation, but we're showing up and able to converse around these topics because of what we have experienced, what we've studied, what our field of. So it's not coming from fresh air, it's coming from stuff that we have in our mind-brain-body network. And so therefore, if we are experiencing negative issues, which all of us do, life is messy, we all are mess. Messiness is a normal part of being a human. And if we manage that mess, it has one impact on the psychoneurobiological network. But if we live in the mess and we don't manage it, then things tip, the scales tip and things get worse. And because the mind is using the brain and the body in this way, and then that feeds back into the mind will wear out, the messy mind, unmanaged mind will wear out the brain and the bodies through disrupting the metabolism, through disrupting the increasing inflammation, through downstream effects into the hypothalamic pituitary axis, and so on and so on and so on. And we can go into lots of detail about that. But the whole point is right down to telomeres. I've done research in telomeres showing how with mind management you can change your biological age in as short as 9 weeks with mind management. You add the nutritional factor and the work that you do to that. There's a lot we can do. So therefore I think I've answered your question in a very, very verbose way, but an important statement in that the mind-brain-body connection works together. Life comes in through this network. And the beautiful thing is that what's happened to us, that never goes away. Everything that you go through is in this network, but you can change what the network looks like. Because if it's a toxic network, we have all this metabolic and inflammation and all this stuff that produces the lifestyle diseases we see so prevalent. And we understand that chronic unmanaged stress leads to physical and mental challenges. That's established in the literature. But if we can manage that, what the great news is, in managing our messy mind, we tap into the deepest parts of our network and our spirituality, whatever you want to call it, this incredible humanity of ours. And we can actually stand back and observe the messy, and I'm simplifying this process, and we can actually redirect the energy through the networks and change the actual protein tree-like structures in the brain, change the cytoskeleton of the cells in the body, change the telomeres. You literally change the inflammation. And it's not overnight. This is a time. And that's a large part of the work I've done, is how long does it take to do this, to create effective change in my mind, my brain, my body, and therefore my life. And there's time frames attached to this as well. But the hope is there. With mind management, we can actually change. That's not what the current model is saying. The current model is saying, if you feel depression, that is a symptom. And like diabetes type 1 has, for example, diabetes type 1 is because we don't have sufficient insulin in the pancreas. So you get a test, diagnosis, and a medication that targets the pancreas. You can't do that for mind stuff because it's too big. It's not just a list of symptoms. If you feel depression and anxiety and the next person feels depression and anxiety, they have two totally different stories. So just labeling them with a label is an empty gift, because it doesn't validate or honor the extensiveness and the hugeness of what that person is going through. It also doesn't give them the tools to deal with it, to reconstruct and to change the network.
And that's also why when two people present with the same mental illness symptoms, given the exact same dose of medication and identical medication, they both come up with completely different outcomes.
Exactly, and that's not going to fix the problem either, which the public have been misled about, because the psychotropics are under the classification of drugs because they're psychoactive, which means that they change brain function. and they tamper down the impact of how we feel as we go through, which is okay in short, tiny bursts of time, but it's not fixing the...
It's not fixing what makes you feel that way to begin with. So this is me like sitting up because I'm like getting excited just hearing your conversation, hearing your explanation around this. So I have this understanding, right? You just explained the mind-body brain connection. The way I would describe it from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong as well, is that the brain, like the heart, is an involuntary organ. It just works on its own. It's just an organ that keeps on working. We don't need to control it. And it's like a autonomous factory that has resources, it has storages, it has outputs, and it gets input from the mind. And the mind is like the business unit that pulls from the factory and does all these wonderful things, connect with other people, interact with other people, sell the product, or give feedback back to the factory to edit the product, to change the product in one way or another. And therefore, like the autonomous factory is just operating on its own, but the mind is what's outside and like functioning based off of that factory. Is that the correct understanding?
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining it. And the mind is this ongoing thing that is so huge. And you know what's so interesting is that it's often called the mind is often, and you've heard this, I'm sure, the hard question of science. And I always say, but it's the most obvious. And I've had discussions with other scientists. And I say it's the most obvious question of science, because just the mere fact that you can actually pose that question is evidence that mind is in action. You couldn't do that if you didn't have a mind. So mind's doing all of that stuff. And what they've tried to do with this reductionistic approach that's really hit the road running around the mid-90s with the advent of MRI technology and so on, is that they've tried to take every single mind aspect and attach a biological dimension to it. And that's where they've fallen flat, because you quite correctly say that the brain is this factory, very complex. No computer yet has even come close to the brain, and it's going to take a long time before it even begins to resemble the brain. But it's still not self-generative. The brain is not self-generative, like a gene is not self-generative. They can't switch themselves on. They have to be switched on. They have to be operated and used, and they're very useful, but they are being used by the mind. And as you say, the editing and the fixing of the product and the changing, and that's a great analogy. And if people can understand that and being empowered, and my research has shown people get this. We've had people that have been on multiple diagnoses, multiple medications, multiple therapeutic approaches, and have literally, because we put all of my work, we've upgraded this whole system and put it into a technology platform, because we're basically now a mental health technology platform. And we've done the research with people in extreme states using this app as on their own.
What's the app called?
Called the Neurocycle. Neuro, as in brain, cycle. So it's a Neurocycle. It's a system based on a theory, 38 years of research, and we can talk about what it does and all that in a moment. But we've shown that people using this in these extreme states will get to a point where they actually can cope, up to 81% and more improvement in how they're managing things like depression and anxiety. Because no longer is depression and anxiety a mental illness. When they go through this process, they see depression and anxiety are emotional warning signals that are giving you messages. So if you embrace them for the message they bring, you're then empowered to do something with them. So we need depression, we need anxiety, but we need it in a balanced way so it works for us. So if we don't manage, if we just label and diagnose and don't actually do something about what is the depression attached to, because it's not a standalone it is it's a signal telling us that there's a because of, and if we don't manage, it'll tip the scale. But if we do manage, then anxiety and depression help us experience and understand life, ourself, our experiences, builds empathy, etc., our humanity. So we've kind of dehumanized people over the last 40 years.
It's funny you mentioned that. For the longest time, I always tell myself, when I feel some sort of way, when I feel negativity in one way or another, I always try to tell myself, sleep it off, because it's just chemicals in your brain. So that is dehumanizing it. It's literally taking it out and converting it into pure biochemical reactions. And
exactly, which sounds nice to do, and it sounds, you can identify, you can pinpoint, you can fix, but it doesn't work. billions of euros later, billions of dollars later, it's a disaster. And yet it's still being pushed as the primary way of thinking. But yes, if you're feeling a bit off, that's a signal. Embrace it, process it, reconceptualize it, because it will affect your sleep. Because anything unmanaged in the mind as you go to sleep at night, your mind and is going to work within the network to protect you. So it's going to be trying to sort this out so you're prepared for the next day. So that if you go to bed, we can't resolve everything at night, but we can get to the point where, okay, I acknowledge that this is an issue, and I'll get to it tomorrow when I wake up because I'm too tired now. That will then get you into a state where you can actually sleep, and your metabolism and everything and does what it's supposed to do, the melatonin and all the things we're supposed to. But if one of the most disruptive things to sleep is worrying about something, not resolving something, not having a plan of action in place to try to resolve something, and just medicating that, yes, it may knock you out, but you're going to wake up feeling worse. And if you keep doing that, it's cumulative over time.
So I've got a personal question then for you. Like, I am always, so I've been told, at a younger age, much younger age, that I was too sensitive, I was too emotional. And part of me is always very, like, when I'm passionate about something, I'm passionate about something. So when that doesn't go the way I want, or when something is blocking the way, I get passionate, I get emotional about things. And I was told to not be that sensitive and, sleep it off, or like stuff like that. What would your advice be for people who, like me, may be over passionate about something, may be very hot, headstrong about something when they face a challenge? Yes, you ask them to embrace it, but then sometimes embracing it may cause more chaos in the workplace or with their families and whatnot. What would your advice be?
Okay, so this is a great question. It's so interesting. This is the third time in the last 2 days I've been asked this question, which is so interesting. So, and the sensitivity, let's backtrack a second. One of the things that I've done in my work is to try and help people understand how your mind works uniquely for you. So we all know no one's the same as anyone else. And there's been all these personality tests and everything to try and show how that works, but they haven't really been able to, because they're not that scientific, and they haven't really been able to achieve the goal. But they're very popular because people have an incredible desire to understand themselves. And so based on that, what I did was research looking at my, trying to understand, help a person understand, instead of their personality and their type of this, that, but their next thing, is rather understand how you uniquely think, feel, and choose. How are you in this moment as you listen to me? How are you processing? And then based on, how the modular nature of the brain and the different basic functions that we have, then there's a whole kind of process that you go through. And so I created a very simplistic version. It was very involved when I did it in therapy. It took 7 hours to apply the system I developed, but I've simplified that into a profile. And we're putting that in our app. But currently, it's in a book. It's in one of my books. But basically, the point is that when you look at your I factor, the true you, your true nature, how you uniquely think, feel, and choose, all the listeners and viewers of this podcast currently are hearing the same information. But each one of them, because of their I factor, because of the unique way that their mind thinks, feels, and chooses, they are building a different network. Like you go in a forest of fir trees, and everyone's maybe building a fir tree, but all the fir trees look different, even though they're the same type of tree. And that's the principle operating here. So therefore, the sensitivity aspect is going to be part of your nature. That's your unique think, feel, choose. And the reason it's so important to understand how you think, feel, choose is for the exact reasons that you have said. That if that sensitivity is part of that beautiful nature of your unique think, feel, choose, if you don't know how to use and channel that, because all of us have got combinations, and sensitivity is one that's very obvious, and it's one that tends to get knocked very quickly because people react quicker or seem too intense, or I've been told like I'm too intense or whatever. I remember people telling me that kind of thing, and it's related to this sensitivity factor. If you understand it, you can channel it and use it and have the words to describe it, etc. But if you've been kind of bombed a little bit by life because of your sensitivity, it's kind of tarnished it a little, and so it's distorted it slightly, and it's almost it's kind of attacked your identity and your self-value. So it's almost seen as a negative thing when it's a good thing when it's channeled correctly. And so a lot of the work that I did was to try and help people understand, okay, how can I really understand this and use this to my advantage and have the language to explain to people, no, it's not sensitive. I'm not being sensitive. I'm just processing in a different way. I'm seeing this in a different way. And I can understand that maybe this reaction seemed a little sensitive. And yes, I could definitely taper that because I was in a sort of distorted view of my sensitivity, but I can rebalance that. That's the sort of thing that we can learn to do. Because otherwise, that throws your mental health for a loop. I mean, identity is huge in mental health.
Yeah,
huge.
Absolutely. And people get personal, right? When they feel attacked, they go into defensive mode. And when they go into defensive mode, a lot of logic goes out the window.
Totally.
So,
and high emotions and the wrong words are said, and that can create a whole negative feedback loop. Now, that's all mind stuff that's going in the brain, collapsing and wiring in networks in your brain where the proteins misfold. Now, you and I both know what happens when proteins misfold. Immediately, you're going to get an immune response. And so basically, your brain, your immune system of your brain doesn't see the distinction between a psychological experience and a physical. So if you've got the COVID virus and you've had a toxic abuse, they are going to be recognized by the immune system as two physical things that need to be dealt with. And the inflammatory response begins and the metabolic changes begin. So there's no distinction in how the brain immune system sees that. And therefore, that's why we have to manage that, because if it stays there, it eventually explodes. If your sensitivity has become a toxic issue, that your identity is attacked, your you-ness is being attacked. And that's why it's so important that we help a person reformulate that and move forward.
So it's almost like a chronic disease.
It does become like that, because you and I both know that if you're going to have continual toxic stress unmanaged, so that protein tree of the toxic experience of the sensitivity thing, that's real. It's real proteins in your brain, and they're misfolded, and there's an imbalance of energy and chemicals. You keep that there. It influences the vulnerability of your telomeres, which are making cells, of your metabolism. So therefore, your body increases over time in its vulnerability to disease, and it's something like 35 to 98%. So if your vulnerability of your body is in that state, then with an unmanaged one toxic thought, a bunch of unmanaged toxic thoughts is over time increasing vulnerability, which is why I believe we've seen the increase in lifestyle diseases and people dying early from preventable lifestyle diseases.
And for the sake of our audience here as well, would you mind explaining a little bit on what telomeres are?
Absolutely. So apologies for jumping into that. So telomeres are the ends of chromosomes. So chromosomes you'll find in your cells, in the nucleus, in the DNA. And you all understand, well, chromosomes unwind into the DNA. So we all know the DNA ladder. When it's wound up, it forms an X-shaped chromosome. And if you see where my nails are, that would be your telomeres. So for a very simple example. And your telomeres get shorter every time your cells divide. And your cells are dividing on a continual basis. You make 800,000 to 1 million cells every second. So there's a constant change. And your cells make up your organs, which make up your systems, and therefore your body. And what we've shown from the research, a lot of people before me, obviously I've just basically tagged on to this research, and I do research now on telomeres as well, is that telomeres, basically what they do is that they, when they shorten, that means that your biological health is impacted. Now, as you get older, they're going to naturally shorten, but it doesn't have to be accelerated. You can actually slow it down, and it could be you can increase the health and the longevity of your lifestyle. But what's happening is that a lot of people their biological age, because of unmanaged toxic stress and then unhealthy lifestyle habits, the combination, with the lifestyle being very much in your arena in terms of the ketogenic diet and ketones and metabolism and everything, when your biological age can get older than your chronological age, and that's when we're in a state where we are very vulnerable. And so what we've shown is that in as short as 9 weeks, with very deliberate, intentional, planned and guided, the time management processes, the system of the Neurocycle is the tool of this, the actual tool of mind management that then helps you self-regulate and helps you respond and manage your responses and so on. And that, if you do that in a very planned and guided way over time, and the time frame is what I also research, and it's in these 9-week cycles, which sounds long, but it's not really long. But you can gain years of biological age. We've had people gain up to 35 years of biological health in as short as 9 weeks. and that's just through pure mind management. And we don't.
So in those cases, are the telomeres? Sorry to cut you off, because I got so excited. In those cases, the telomeres, do they just slowing? Did you just slow down their shortening, or these telomeres actually elongated?
So it's a balance. So there's a nice balance that actually happens, because when you start facing an issue and dealing with it, you're going to have an actual decrease in telomere length, and it's very normal because they're so sensitive to stress. So if you suppress something for years, and maybe it's some sort of an abuse, and you're facing it now, that's really hard work. It's very stressful on your system, but it's a healthy form of stress. It's a healthy form of stress because you're going to start experiencing a very healthy form of grief and depression and anxiety, because you need to mourn and work through that terrible situation. That creates a shortening of the telomere. But if you are managing it through that process, it doesn't shorten as much as if you're not managing. So in our control groups, the telomeres also decrease in the treatment and control group. But when you get the point of, okay, now I know where I'm going, and that's around about a 3-week period, you then see that the decrease stops in the treatment group, and it starts to increase, whereas it continues to decrease in the control group. Now, we have to replicate this, obviously, but it lines up with Professor Blackburn and Lisa Eppel's work on telomeres. I've already consulted with Dr. Eppel, and so we're very excited in looking at this, because we also use QEEG, so we look in the brain. That's the psychoneurobiology. We look at the person's story. We look at what's going on in the brain, and I use QEEG because of the energetic responses. Accurate. It's millions of responses in a second, so you're going to get a really good response of what is actually going on an energy level in the brain. It tells you a lot of stuff, and then it also changes from moment to moment, so it's much more realistic. And then you look at what's going on in the body, and we'll look at things like telomeres and ACTH and cortisol and prolactin. Even prolactin in males and females is very significantly linked to things like how we manage our emotional stress. We're seeing a Goldilocks principle happening in the brain. And the Goldilocks principle is that every single one of us has our own unique bioindividuality, our own unique way that we think, and that's just right for us. And the energy that we want to see in the brain when someone's actually managing their mind, even when they're working through stressful stuff, is a bit like the waves in the sea, when the sea is doing what it's supposed to do, when it's not in tsunami or something like that. And so waves build and they crash and so on. And you want to see that kind of balance across the left and the right side of the brain. And so what we're seeing is when people aren't managing their mind, when they're just getting in this toxic hole and just not like moving forward and that kind of thing, or just moving forward but in battling, is that Goldilocks principle, that balance is not happening. And that creates a lot of other issues. And then that sets up this telomere vulnerability and whatever, all the rest of the biological stuff. But when they start to get rebalanced, it changes. And what really excites us is that this is something that you can teach to children as young as 2 and 3 years of age in a very proactive and preventative way. Because so many of my patients, when I was still practicing, were children and adults. I'm seeing both sides of the coin. And now we reach millions with our platform. And I get so many people contacting us, and adults are saying, why didn't I learn how to process my emotions when I was a child? I wasn't allowed to, or I didn't know how to. And now in this day and age, they're also not processing, because as soon as they have an emotion, that's like, if there's too many of them, it's a symptom of a disease, which is also wrong. So we want to also help an adult be empowered, adolescents and adults. We also want to help young kids in a proactive way know how to read the signals of their network, mind, brain, body.
It's almost like you read my mind, because that was going to be my next question.
I'm reading your mind already.
I know that you are the expert of the mind. So I mean, that's the proof. But I love the fact that you mentioned the Goldilocks zone, because we talk about it so much on this show and everywhere. Where my background is in metabolism, right? Physiology and metabolism. And I always say metabolism is never a straight line. It's an interweb of pathways, but most importantly, it's always needed to be in the Goldilocks zone of optimalism. Like just being in an optimal zone for pH, for temperature, for just amount of hormones and enzymes. Because even if you look at exogenous hormones that people take, or say, testosterone replacement therapy, like it's very specific. Like you need, like a milligram would make a difference, whereas some other, like for example, macronutrients grams of it makes difference. So like different biochemical components in our bodies need to be in very specific levels of dosing and all the environment needs to be optimal. So I love the fact that you mentioned the Goldilocks zone.
We see that in the gamma wave as well and the beta wave, when we look at the different frequencies. I'm just about to publish another paper now on this whole psychoneurobiological, but we were looking specifically with the gamma wave and in telomeres and prolactin and in the psychological self-regulation. And the Goldilocks zone it comes out all over the place. And things like the gamma wave, which is what we look at, it's the frequency in the brain when you're learning, when there's a lot of neuroplasticity taking place. Just for your listeners, I know you know what it is, but just in case people don't know what that is, it's an energy wave in the brain, and there's different types of energy waves, and they each perform different functions and they work in concert, and everyone's got their own Goldilocks balance of each of these waves and how they work at different times, etc. And they've been used incorrectly in the past, like fMRIs as well, where people will say that's when you have that tonic gamma frequency, so long-term high, whatever, that is bad or that is good. That's the sign of this brain. And if you look at it, this MRI scan, that's an ADHD brain. You can't actually say that. It's not at all accurate. All you can say is that what is going on in that person's brain in that particular moment. And if they are very chronically stressed and not managing something, we're going to see a certain pattern that's out of the Goldilocks zone. And we're going to see things but you've got to get a baseline and that kind of stuff. So it comes in the frequency as well. And you can teach a person to, with the physiology, looking at the QEEG, or just through pure mind management, because of how a person feels at the end of the day and how they function. That's the most important thing. I can show you something fancy on a brain, but if you are still feeling like you can't cope in your life, that's the real measure of success of mental health.
Yeah, and it's too often that we look at health from a snapshot point of view. Like you just mentioned, you just, take a snapshot and then you go by association to a certain manifestation of a symptom or of a disease, and then you jump to conclusion. Whereas you need to look at the whole pattern of it. You need to look at, what is the differences between baseline and over X period of time. Those are all super important. So let's go back to the original discussion on what my next question is going to be. So how do you teach your children to clean up their mental mess? I know this is a very famous, very, popular term in your world, and you have your podcast, cleaning up the mental mess. So yeah, tell us more, because I think what we do here on this H.V.M.N. podcast show is that we talk a lot about metabolic health, about aging, about longevity, how to age healthily, how to, increase longevity. We don't talk enough on how to help children, like the next generation, to prepare them for what's to come, which is the increasing prevalence of chronic diseases, mental illness, and all of this. How can we help them prevent that?
Excellent question. I'm so glad that you asked that too. In terms of managing our mind, the messiness is very normal, and I think that's very, very key. Is to the way you help our children is to allow them to actually be messy, to understand that when your child comes home from school, perhaps, and they've been, they're throwing a tantrum, or they are difficult, or they're arguing, or your adolescent is withdrawing and on social media and all this kind of stuff. That's not who they are. They are doing that because they're showing up with certain signals. So when we talk about the messiness, it's those things. It's the messiness on a scale of 1 to 10. So if you think of 1, 2, 3 being like your day-to-day struggles and just irritation in traffic or whatever, minor little argument with someone, but nothing major. In the middle of the scale, the sort of 5, 6, 7, that's now getting to patterns and bad habits and things that are potentially becoming problematic in your life, in your body, in your etc. Need to be paid attention to these patterns developing. And then the others, the 8, 9, 10s would be your extreme traumas, the abuse and racism and socioeconomic challenges and combat and, all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of just to give you a viewpoint. Now, we need to be able to manage all of those because your mind is enabling you to experience all of those. So therefore, the experience of all of those is messy. The other side of the coin is that we get good stuff, a lot of good stuff, but we don't pay enough attention to the good stuff because you talk a lot about optimization. And optimization is another aspect of optimization is the fact that if you have a fleeting thought that passes through your mind of a great conversation like this one that we're having, and you maybe think of it tomorrow, or you think of a great dinner you had with a great friend or something like that, that passes through, and for a moment we feel this rush of really healthy responses in our network, and we pass it over. We should grab that. Even if you spend 30 seconds, it's all like literally concentrating, focusing, evaluating the emotions and behaviors as a pattern that you go through, a sequence that you go through. You are wiring and you are unmasking and wiring extra resilience into the network that is increasing brain health, that is then preventative in the long run. Because things like your dementia, your Alzheimer's, these lifestyle diseases that are increasing. And like when I was practicing initially, we didn't see people with Alzheimer's and dementias under 75, 80, 85. Now we're getting this at 35 years of age. People are presenting with early onset Alzheimer's and things. So there's a massive component, not just amyloid beta plaques. It is a thought issue. It is a thought issue that's affecting cell division, metabolism. It's a whole package thing. So that's why we got to start young with our kids. It's never too late. So let me say, whatever age you're at, there's always hope. You can be 80 and 90, and there's always hope because of the fact that our mind is so strong and can heal the networks as we go through this process. But how great would it be for the next generation, to go to your question, to be able to empower them to have the tools to manage their mind going in, so that they automatically respond to the kind of information you give. If they don't question that I need to look after my metabolic health, that this is something that I need because my mind is using my brain, I better keep my brain and body in a healthy state. We need to give them the tools that if someone's bullying them and they're coming home and they don't know how to deal with it, we give them the language and the tools and the skills to process it. So based on that, I wrote this book based on 38 years of research and working with kids, all that stuff. And I developed a system called the Neurocycle. And as I mentioned earlier, and the Neurocycle is very complex, but very simple in its application. It's 5 steps with a preparation phase. It's something you can do in 10 seconds once you understand it in the day-to-day stuff, that 1, 2, and 3 on the scale. As soon as you hit the middle and the end of the scale, you're going to have to do it for longer, around about 5 to 15 minutes for the middle of the scale, around about 15 to 45 minutes for the trauma stuff. And when you hit the middle of the scale and the end of the scale, so 7, from sort of 6 onwards, you're going to have to work in blocks of 9 weeks in order to rewire the network, to seek effective change in your life and to feel that sense of peace. I'm not saying to take all the pain away. I'm talking about you can't change your story, but you can change what it looks like inside of you, and therefore how it plays out into your future. And, that whole human element thing. So the Neurocycle does all of that. Plus, it also works on an optimization factor, where if something great goes through your head, grab it through your mind, grab it, and don't just let it pass by. Spend the 30 seconds, spend a minute, and grow that into your brain, literally, because it wires in all these nice networks that are very supportive. So essentially, the preparation phase is all of the things that we all hear so much about: mindfulness, meditation, breathing, all the things that help to calm down your neurophysiology and get your HPA axis, your hypothalamic pituitary axis, under control, the chemistry, the brain waves, the things that are going crazy when we're in a mess. And there's different, obviously, levels of mess that we go into. And so the brain preparation, this whole thing starts with me saying, it's okay to be a mess. Let me prepare my brain. That could be a simple breathing exercise like breathe in for 3 and out for 7. I have lots of examples in my books. In my app, I walk you through 3-minute exercises, and you can find a lot of that kind of thing out there. But if you just do that, you're going to create an awareness, a general awareness of how you're feeling, what's going on in your mind, be calmer, etc. But it can make you worse if you don't go beyond that. And the research is very evident now. There's a lot of research coming out now showing that increased mindfulness and stopping there creates a worse problem, because you don't know what you're doing. What do you do with all the stuff? Kind of like flying a plane. You don't know how to, if you only know how to take off, you're going to crash. You have to know how to prepare the plane, take off, fly, and land, and know how to keep in the right direction and all that kind of thing. And the Neurocycle is taking you through that full cycle. It's preparing you for the flight, it's the takeoff, it's the flying, and it's the landing. And as you do each of the brain preparation and the takeoff, flying, landing things, you are creating changes in your psychoneurobiological network that enable you to control, empower you to change what it looks like inside of you. So those distorted proteins that are stimulating this immune response and messing with your metabolism, you have the opportunity with your mind to recreate those, and from the root level, they'll always be there. So think of them as these trees that are maybe ugly but very much alive, And then you going to the root system, because you've got to get down from the signals to the roots, and I'm going to quickly walk you through that in a moment. But once you get to the roots, you're not ripping the tree out, you're feeling the roots, because there's certain things in life that you're just going to have to accept. Who knows why someone raped someone? Who knows why someone says it? You may not ever get the answer why that person has done whatever that's affected you. But it's a sense of, okay, that affects me in this way. This is why I'm showing up in this way. Okay, I can make peace with that. I can't fix them, but I can fix me. And in fixing me, maybe that impacts them. And they do the work, whatever. So it's to get to that level of acceptance and then to reconstruct and move forward. So you remember, but you're moving, it's affecting your future differently. So instead of being stuck, you actually are maybe sad still, but you're moving forward. And over time, the space grows and you can deal with it more efficiently. You feel less sad and so on. So the first step you prepare is the preparation. And the first step is to gather awareness. Second step is to reflect. Third is to write or visualize, enact, dramatize. And the fourth is to recheck if it is the active reach. Each is doing, the sequence is very important. You don't skip anything. All of these are very logical things. You do this, you didn't even know you were doing this, but this is how your networks run at 400 billion actions per second. They run in these cycles. And these cycles are how we process things into the network and how we show up. So if we can then consciously do this, deliberately, intentionally retrain ourselves on a conscious level, then we can kind of fix up the messes we've made. And that's what we can teach kids as young as 2 to do. So with children, obviously as young as 2 and 3, where I'm going to explain it with words now, you would use words, but age appropriate. So I've broken the book into different sections where I give you a developmental table, for example, and this is how you would explain this to a 2-year-old versus a 5-year-old. 2 and 3-year-old versus a 5-year-old versus a 10-year-old. And then I obviously have the other books in the Neurocycle app for adolescents and adults. And so there's also cartoons that we've created called Brainy. And so with young children and adults love this too. It makes it very easy. But we've cartooned the whole concept too with a little character called Brainy. We even have a toy. Here's a little Brainy toy. And we even have a coloring book, because that's what kids relate to, coloring with Brainy and friends. And it creates scenarios. So what you're doing is creating a platform where a child has access to their mind, to manage their mind. So gather awareness is very specific. I've created awareness with the brain preparation. The gathering, I'm focusing very specifically on how I'm showing up. So I'm gathering awareness of how am I in the moment. Maybe it's a child who's throwing a tantrum, very angry, got a sore tummy, and doesn't want to go play. Okay, so that's 4 areas: emotions, behaviors, bodily sensation, perspective. Maybe it's you as the adult, and you feeling really flat, really tired and worn out. Emotions. Behavioral bodily sensation starting to show with maybe some lifestyle issues, metabolic issues and so on. In terms of behaviors, maybe snappy, irritable, not resting enough, that kind of thing, not good sleep. And perspective, life sucks. Okay, so that's gathering awareness of those 4 categories. Now, they're not symptoms, they're categories of signals. Signals give us information. So what we want to do is identify those very specifically, and that then brings this network that's in the mind-body connection into the conscious mind. On a neuroscience level, it's loosened the protein connection, so now it's malleable. I can change it. I can start getting to the roots and deconstructing and reconstructing. It's created a change in the energy patterns. It's calmed down the neurophysiology. It's changed the endocrine system. So there's a lot of stuff that's actually going on as you do that. Then you move into the next step. And you don't spend long in that. Let's say you're doing the 1, 2, 3 part. It's a daily struggle. You could spend like 2 minutes, 10 seconds on each. So you could get through the whole thing in literally under a minute.
Yeah, so the key is not wallow in your problems. Don't identify them and then sit with them for days on end.
You move forward. Yeah, you keep progressing. So if it's a day-to-day struggle, you do it quick. If it's the pattern in the middle, you're going to still do it quick, but you're going to spend 5 to 15 minutes. So that means I'm going to spend around about 1 to 3 minutes per step, because it's very specific. If it's a big trauma, I'm going to spend around 5 minutes per step. Maybe a bit longer on some of the steps, like step 4 and 5. So it's quite specific. And that's how you, over time, you heal the network. You can't bomb yourself with everything and fix everything in a day. Your brain gets tired. As we know, energy, metabolism wears down like a battery on a cell phone. And your conscious mind gets tired. Your unconscious never gets tired. Okay, so the next step is to reflect. And reflect, if you think of shining a white light through a prism, it becomes a rainbow on the other side. So reflect is to focus reflection, focus that light on those 4 signals, and see what they tell you. Why? What's the why behind them? Then the third step is to get that what you've gathered and reflected and put it down on paper. Now, this is not nice, pretty journaling. This is a brain dump. It's put down everything that you can, which brings order out of chaos. It activates a whole electromagnetic and genetic response where your brain is collapsing waves of energy and genetic and short, long-term, medium and long-term genetic responses, but you're kind of influencing that. And you're almost designing what you want to put down, what you want to find, and you are accessing through the subconscious, which is a portal, a doorway, into the non-conscious, which is the biggest, most intelligent, organic, life-giving part of us that's on our side and working with the body and all that stuff. Very huge thing. I explained it in the book in a very simple way for adults and kids. And you're tapping into that, and you're tapping into your inner wisdom. All of us have wisdom in our core. We're wired for love. That's what a scientist said who won a Nobel Prize, Eric Kandel. You are wired for love. You see that in our biology. You know that from the research. Your body's designed to help you, not to fight you. So therefore, that's why we have an immune system and so on. So therefore, your non-conscious is doing that. It's scanning. What are the trees in the forest that are toxic and affecting you? What's the most prominent one that you work on first? And what's going on in your body? And you get all these signals that are coming through. So when you get to that third step, after doing the other two steps, we start tapping into this wisdom that's in our networks. And it starts coming up. And you see things that you didn't think that were associated. And everything that comes up, you put it down because it's giving you incredible insight. And then the next step is to say, okay, now let me make sense of all this mess. Then you can recheck. This has happened. What can I do? What's the pattern? What's the trigger? What's the antidote? And then you close the cycle because your brain works in cycles of tension release. Your entire body, all your biochemistry, tension release, tension release. So anything that goes on for too long burns out. So it's the same thing. Don't want to go on too long. We want to close the cycle. And that's an active reach. And it's quite simple. It's quite simply something that you've gained from the exercise you've done to carry you through the day and to keep you moving forward. Simple. It could be a simple statement like, it's okay to be a mess. I'm going to work on this more tomorrow. Or being sensitive is actually a good thing. It's something like that. So it's some kind of statement, positive affirmation. Maybe it's as simple as imagining a rainbow. Whatever works for you in that moment, and it grows and extends, and it's as you move through the days. Ideas, you can't fix it in one moment. But the medium and long-term stuff, you can. The short-term stuff, the day-to-day, you can get in action and move forward immediately. But the patterns and trauma patterns that we want to work over time. So that's kind of the basic idea. And with the kids, as I say, you explain it with toys and with a child, if they're having a bad day, having a toy like this becomes an access point to a child. And if they can't verbalize a 2-year-old or 3-year-old or 4-year-old, the bullying that's happening, or maybe the abuse that's happening, having this contact point and knowing that there's a safe space of that pretty little couch or chair in your house, which is where we go and, sit and talk about how we're feeling, create a designated space, have this in a little toy box, have some notepads, have some pens, some books there. Put this, if you get the book, put that there because the kids will point to the pictures and the cartoons. But they can come in and they can go and sit there and they can pick this up. And that's a message to you that there's something going on. And you teach them this over time. And then they pick it up. You sit with them and you say, do you want to show me what Brainy's sad? And then, the child will dramatize or draw or enact, but you've opened the contact, the point of collaboration, deep meaningful connection. You've given them a tool, and as they become more and more familiar with the system, it becomes a lifestyle. Now they go into school and they grow up and they go into adolescence and they go into adulthood. You keep building the skill because you're using your mind all day long. So it's into that you can fit all the other things as I mentioned in the beginning. But part of the things for optimization related to the neurocycle in terms of your world is with my mind, I make a decision. I want my metabolic health to improve. So what do I need to do? Let me gather awareness of what's going on. So for a doctor, as a diagnostic process to help a patient self-regulate and just to understand, you can go through those exact same steps and work. And your active reach is your action plan. So what can we do in this session now? And then you've actually wired that in because there's a lot of research with doctors, as you probably are very familiar with, and we don't even need the research to know that this happens. You tell your patient something and they do it for a week or whatever, and then they don't do it, or they don't take the ketones, or they don't get into that, they get to the diet for a week because it hasn't been wired in, the meaning hasn't been created. So you approaching your patients in this way, approaching everything, is making sure it goes where it's supposed to go, so you do what you're supposed to do. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, amazing explanation. And I think just me imagining right now, as you were explaining, imagining myself doing the exercise, I can already see how effective and how powerful the exercise is to just have that awareness of what my problems are. And as you said, I don't necessarily have the solution to it today, but the fact that it will now keep lingering in my mind, but my mind also works in a cycle. It doesn't linger as a problem anymore, but it lingers as a problem that I identified, but also with a solution that is suggested what I should do today. So it's a whole cycle. And then, wiring it into younger individuals is even better, because a lot of times we were not taught to express our emotions well. We were taught how to express physical needs, but not so much emotional needs. And this is so powerful, because then when you normalize it within these younger generations, then it becomes a norm. And when it becomes a norm, it is so much easier to open up and not bottle things up. Because as you know, when you bottle things up, it accumulates over time, and it causes real physiological change that may not be very well for your physical health.
Exactly. And are contributors to the aging and dementia and vulnerability. Every person is different, so we can't say if you have a bad thought you're going to get dementia. It doesn't work like that. But it's the vulnerability increases. And there's a really interesting study just showing the power of mind management. It's not my study, but there's research showing that if someone in your family has, for example, Alzheimer's, and you worry about getting Alzheimer's because of the messaging of it being genetic, which hasn't actually been confirmed. We see a disrupted gene, but we don't actually, and we see certain patterns, but there's a lot more to it than just the simple, oh, you have the gene, you're going to get Alzheimer's. There's a lot more, as you and I both know. But that's not the messaging that the general public gets. So there's a tremendous fear that if a family member has it, that you're going to get it. And I don't know how many people I have spoken to over the years. It's probably hundreds, if not thousands, saying that, hey, there's a study showing that if you worry about getting Alzheimer's, your chance of getting Alzheimer's increases by up to 60%.
60%.
And more. So it's the worry that's the issue. So in other words, it's the messy mind that's unmanaged. If you've wired in, oh, my grandmother had it, my mother's got it, my father had whatever, and it's gone back generation, this is in me, the doctors are saying it. So you've got the tree forming in your networks, in your brain as a tree, and as I explained earlier on.
Kind of like manifestation.
It grows and grows and grows, and that toxic thing is weakening your metabolism, is weakening your cell division, is weakening your telomeres. So, and if you worry, and that then sets up a vulnerability, masks your resilience. So other things that happen become more difficult to manage. So it's cumulative, not one thing. It's a cumulative weakness that eventually can crash in some sort of lifestyle disease that kills you early, or a dementia, or something like that.
And of course, like, I always believe that life force, like people's dedication and people's passion to live life, is a very, very strong power. It's a very strong force. And if you have given up and almost like settle with the fact that you are going to develop Alzheimer's, or if you are going to develop X disease, then that increases the risk of developing it. And I have experienced it myself, because, growing up with my mom's family, high prevalence of diabetes and obesity, my late father died of stroke and heart attack. If I just settled, and I did growing up thinking, why would I exercise? I'm going to end up being like them. Why would I stop smoking? I smoked for 7 years. And at the peak of it, I was smoking 40 cigarettes a day. And I was like, why bother? Everyone's going to die. I'm going to die, and might as well just do whatever I want. Not until I learned about physiology, metabolism, and lifestyle changes that I changed my lifestyle. And that wasn't voluntarily either. It was really funny, because I started exercising without actually having the intention to exercise. I started going for a run because my housemate at that time in my undergrad, it was in the UK, it was Nottingham, asked me to go for a jog with her.
I was dying. I could not run, right? I was overweight. I was a smoker. I did not live healthily. I was dying and I was very embarrassed. So I kept doing that because of my ego. It's not because I wanted to get healthy. It was not because I wanted to lose weight.
Well, good motivation, wasn't it?
It was good motivation because I was 22 and I was like, I cannot be like this. Like, I was like, this is an embarrassment. I need to at least be able to finish this 2-kilometer run around the loop of the lake in the university and not be dying. And then 4 months later, I lost about 20 kilos. That's like 45 pounds. And I was like, I felt good. I look better. And then I moved to New York. People treat me differently because now from UK, like I led a complete different life. I moved to New York to do my master's in Columbia University. Now, people who saw me in New York saw me for the first time. They didn't know I was overweight. So I got to experience how people treated me when I was overweight versus when I lost all those weight.
That's really sad though, isn't it? I mean,
It's very sad. It's very superficial. It's very, very materialistic. But that's the world we live in, right? But the fact that I have done all that and then I couple that with my scientific knowledge and I was like, actually, no, I don't have to end up like my father, or I don't have to end up like some of my relatives who have to battle with diabetes and obesity if I do something about it now, right? And that's exactly what you were sharing with your data, with your insights and what you found in your studies.
I work with a lot of doctors and physicians, and there's a lot of them have said, because doctors aren't trained in mind. Let's face it, that's not their training. They get a 3-week or 4-week rotation max, and it's basically how to identify the DSM-and medication, or the ICD and medication. And one of the things that they always comment on is that the need for a holistic, the ones that I work with, the need to actually recognize the power of the mind in influencing how a person's going to move forward in their life. And there's such a move now amongst medicals. I mean, I work with my team. It includes medical scientists and practicing doctors and medical students and things. And there's such an awareness now, which is good. But not everyone's doing that. Not everyone is at that point where they're recognizing that link between how important it is to manage your mind in order to manage your health. So yeah, that's amazing how you saw that passion and the change.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? I thought of something funny now, and this is probably why fortune tellers make their money, or fortune tellers become, the oracle or whatnot, because they say something and then it plants a seed in you, and then you grow it and into this thought tree, and then you manifest whatever that was told to you and made it true.
Exactly. That's what's going on there.
So I've got one last question. I know we're sort of over time here because this conversation is super exciting, Caroline. I'm learning so much from you. I'm also getting so much reaffirmation of what I've believed in both biological as well as psychological from a mind perspective. So the last question I want to ask you is, what is actually going on in our brain when we go through a creative process?
Oh, I love that question. So I can take it from many different angles, but I'll give a simple version. So if you look at using a QEEG, if you look at the gamma activity in the brain, and a way to visualize gamma activity, which is very much related to creativity, insight, learning, we'll see when people are having a creative moment, we'll see bursts of gamma, quite often a long burst of gamma in the Goldilocks principle, which is just the right amount. And we'll also see bursts of theta and delta. Now, normally theta and delta are more active at night when you're sleeping. But when you have bursts of creativity, you can see bursts of the delta and the theta. So in other words, the delta and theta wave are very low frequency, and gamma is very high frequency. So thinking that of the waves, if you think of the waves far out, it's a big swell. And I'm saying that because I'm looking directly at the sea here. Big swells is the far out, and that would be like your delta, or this low frequency. Then coming in close to shore, they're not quite as big. It'll be theta, and then as you get up to the shore, it's the alpha wave as it starts to build towards a wave, and then as it builds into the wave, that's beta. As it gets to the crest, high beta. As it crashes on the beach, that's gamma. the little waves, and then it sucks back in and the cycle repeats, which is a lovely way of picturing the energy of your brain. You want that kind of pattern happening across the brain in different ways for different functions and so on. So with creativity, we're going to get these sort of patterns as per the Goldilocks principle of bursts of beta, bursts of delta and theta. So like a big sort of a high level of an increase in the big wave at the back, and the one in front of it, and then the one that crashes on the beach, and that's and across the brain in different places, and that creates a very deep, insightful. It doesn't create. It's a response to the deep, insightful nature of creativity. And so it's immediately, whatever you do with your mind is going to impact on your brain, and then your body starts responding in a really healthy way. So endocrine system and hypothalamic pituitary axis really balances and starts working for you and that kind of thing. So your insight, as a result, your insight will also increase, and then you create this beautiful cycle where it just grows and grows. So creativity is wonderful. One of the things that related to that's the side note, with all this heat that we're experiencing across the globe at the moment, a reporter actually asked me just yesterday about what is that doing in our brain and how can we help, and changes your chemistry. And short bursts of heat are fine, like a sauna and that kind of thing, but the long chronic heat that we're experiencing, it drains the brain of energy, and it causes chemical reactions, affects how the neurons fire, and they can go silent or they can get active, and that can affect our mood and that sort of thing. But so what creativity is a great balance, because there's what could you do? Obviously get your child inside and get yourself inside into cool environments as much as possible. Make some frozen yogurt or something, and while you're eating the frozen yogurt, which will bring your body temperature down and your brain quite quickly, you get brain freeze from ice cream. You want to get a bit of brain freeze, read a really challenging, beautiful fiction story, fiction storybook that is challenging, and like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or Harry Potter, or something that engages and that requires like imagination. And so while they're eating the frozen ice cream and cooling down their body temperature, creating a little bit of brain freeze, you're also reading them the story that they picture and they visualize, and that's a really great way of stimulating creativity and creating a nice little cycle of brain health.
Wow, I did not know that at all. Does that work the same if instead of a book they watch a movie? I would assume it will be less effective because it was already depicted for them, rather than forcing them to imagine that sort of setting.
I like that question, because I would suggest that they do a bit of that first, and then go watch the Harry Potter movie. Like maybe do something like that, or so you do a balance. Or if they're watching a movie, then play Lego or something. Do some Lego while you're doing it, or any kind of where they're using something with their hands, or maybe even drawing squiggles while they're doing it, so that it just balances out and brings another level of creativity. And those are great things to do to help with creativity, and to help also give the energy, because that gives the energy a brain boost to the brain energy.
Yeah,
it's a charge.
I wonder what role ketones have to play in that, because ketones providing direct energy to the brain while you are boosting energy, or you're boosting brain activity here.
Yes, I'm sure you're probably increasing ketones. That would be an interesting study. What does a creativity exercise do to the ketones, and to track it with QEG? Now here we're getting all nerdy again.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I can definitely, especially with exogenous ketones, when you can directly increase the level of ketones, and then you look at the brain activity and creativity level, because what we have found is that ketones does work on the GABA pathway and help with relaxation, but at the same time provide energy to the brain. And so you have this calm energy, and then having an increased burst of creativity. What will come out of that?
Very interesting.
So stay tuned. That's Dr.
For study.
Yeah, Dr. Leaf and I, we are going to have a follow-up call talking about how we could potentially collaborate and look at the marriage of both our areas of expertise, and see how we can improve people's lives and people's brains. All right, so for our audience, where can they find you? And please share with them your book title, where can they find it, everything.
Absolutely. You can find me at my social media handles are Dr. Caroline Leaf. My webpage is drleaf.com. You can get the book wherever books are sold. My most recent book, which is coming out on the 8th of August, is How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess. Sorry, it's mirror image. I don't know how to fix that. A Guide to Building Resilience and Managing Mental Health. So it's filled with the Neurocycle. We've got Brainy and available, and the coloring book available on my website, which are great support materials. I've got a lot of other books too. There's the Neurocycle app you can get on iTunes and Google Play. There's also a web version. And my podcast is called Cleaning Up the Mental Mess, and you'll be a guest on there one of these days, and we'll continue this conversation. And it's pretty much where they can get hold of me.
Absolutely. It'll be a great honor to be on my podcast as well. And for those who have children, I don't have children myself, but for those who have, I'm sure you've sort of benefited a lot from this conversation, and feel free to grab all these resources that Dr. Caroline Leaf have provided, from her years of experience and expertise. So thank you again so much for coming on to the Health via Modern Nutrition podcast. It has been an honor and a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it so much as well. It's been really fun.